Hey everyone, I'm Chris Finelli, Treasurer Local 36. We're sitting down today with President Dave Hoagland because we want to talk to you about the contract or the lack thereof. So there's been some progress recently, mainly procedural in terms of arbitration, but Dave, can you provide us with an update as to what's transpired lately?
Yeah, so we recently had a scheduling call with an arbitrator. So now an arbitrator is essentially a judge, and they're a neutral who is going to make the decision about our contract dispute. So we've identified dates that they're available. So we have to go by the dates and availability of the arbitrator. So the earliest dates that they had available were some dates scattered throughout July and early August. And those are the dates that we've identified to have our hearing. And that's where we will put on all the evidence to present our case, and then management will put on all the evidence to promote their case. Once the arbitration hearing is done and those arguments are completed, the two parties agree on what's called a final briefing schedule, because after the oral arguments, both sides submit written arguments. And so those are deadlines at which each side needs to put their arguments in, and that's typically roughly a month, sometimes longer, from the receipt of transcripts for the arbitration, which is there's a court reporter in there who's going to record everything. So that'll likely, we will then the arbitrator, once they receive that, puts together their decision and then releases it. So they likely will not release their decision until sometime in October.
Yeah. Doing the month math here, oral hearings, July, August.
Yep.
The month of September would likely be the briefing.
Yep.
And then they have so many days to rule on it once everything is submitted.
Exactly.
So how long is that?
That's typically roughly 30 days from the receipt of the briefs.
So that's what puts us to October.
Yeah, puts us on an October timeline. And the difference between here, we haven't gone to arbitration in a number of years. The last contract we actually reached just in agreement at the table. But prior to that, our two other agreements went to arbitration. The distinction I want to make is that when an arbitrator rules, that's the decision. They make the decision. It doesn't come back to the membership to ratify it. So we just go with what the arbitrator says. So then once the arbitrator issues their ruling, it's either management's case or our case. There's no meeting in the middle there.
Yeah, so the arbitrator can't pick different things from each person's proposals. It's the city's proposal versus the local's proposal. But leading up to that point, or at any point during arbitration, you can still negotiate with the city on a deal outside or that doesn't involve an arbiter's ruling, right?
Yeah. We also set deadlines for last, best, and final offers. So leading all the way up to the arbitration, we'll still be exchanging proposals. And then we make a decision from there about whether or not to continue with the hearing. FOP made a deal in arbitration about a year ago. They got a proposal at the 11th hour from management, but they still elected to go to arbitration.
Got it. So they got a deal towards the end, but then they still wanted the arbiter to rule.
Yeah, it wasn't a deal, but they got a proposal at the end. So that same thing will happen here. It's tough to speculate about it and whether or not that deal will be enough, but I think it's fair to say that more than likely we'll be headed to arbitration.
Okay.
And then, so once the arbitrator makes that ruling, which will be sometime in the fall, then the mayor's office has to implement the ruling, put a package together, then put it in front of the council, and it needs to sit in front of the council for an approval. So, and then once the council approves it, then it goes back to the mayor for implementation. So I think we're looking at end of this year, early next year for all of that to get processed and money to finally end up in our members' pockets.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And that's kind of, we blow timelines all the time. So it's not like these are hard and fast. But now that we have more of a schedule with arbitration, you can almost pace it out to where, it couldn't be any sooner than December, maybe the latest into next year.
And I want to clarify that comment you made about blowing timelines. It's not us who blows timelines.
Sure.
We always abide by the timelines.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the city who doesn't blow timelines. So I think what you were getting at essentially is that now there's a neutral arbitrator, and this is outside of their ability to to do stall tactics, etc.
Yeah, there's no more stalling.
Yeah.
We're on a train. It's moving.
Yeah.
It's
They
getting
got
somewhere.
to put up or shut up.
So, and that's a quick update as to like what's happened recently. But take us back to when this all started. Like when does a negotiation process formally start?
Yeah, so this is all laid out in the DC code, but you have to give notice ahead of time before your contract is going to expire. So we first sent notice to them in June of 2023 that that we were our intent to negotiate, and that's when we attempted to start bargaining. Like for instance, with this arbitration this June, we're still going to have to send a notice to the city about our intent to negotiate for the next 3 years after this 3-year agreement is that we're trying to get to the table, because by October 1, we will be into the last year of this agreement that we're trying to settle with the arbitrator.
Sure.
That's how far behind we are.
Yeah, and so June 2023 is when we sent a letter of intent to bargain. When did we first sit down at a table with the city?
The mayor's office did not tell us that they were ready to negotiate until July of 2024.
Okay,
so an entire year span of time.
But that was the first time we sat down with the city.
Yeah, because they were arguing that they had to settle agreements with the teachers and the police before us. Their rationale being that the largest public sector union in the city is the teachers, followed by the police, followed by us. So the way the Bowser administration has kind of handled this is they try to do largest to smallest. Obviously, there's been a lot of bumps in the road since then with a lot of the stuff going on the Hill, and there's been all these curveballs that have been thrown at us essentially with our own city budget. So that's prolonged the process as well.
Yeah, and we can maybe get into that in a little bit. But I always wondered until I started getting involved in it, like, what does this table look like? Who's at this table?
Yeah, so that's another challenge is they're just negotiating with us, but we're negotiating with, it's all held at the Office of Labor Relations and Collective Bargaining. But at the table are people from the Office of Labor Relations and Collective Bargaining, and then some chiefs from the department and some people from the labor relations team. So we're negotiating with the department, but also the city. So we're kind of negotiating with two parties. They have to meld together. So ORCB is trying to look at what other city contracts are out there, what other bargaining units have, and then the department's there to deal with specific issues related to the fire department. So that's kind of who all is at the table. Sometimes the fire chief is there. In this process, the fire chief has not been there. He's kind of delegated it out to some of his assistants. But that's kind of what's comprised of the two bargaining teams.
And so when you get to this table, you sit down, you got the city, OLRCB, and the department and the union on the other side with our attorneys, and we exchange proposals, right? Like, so I think the most of them come at that first meeting, and, we'll slide proposals across the table. They'll do the same. We'll go back, review them, come back with either questions, counter proposals. At times we are lucky and we both agree on something, and the term is tentatively agree on something where, the contract's not done, but you can set it aside because we can move on from whatever we're talking about or whatever article we want changed. But at the end of the day, it goes back and forth for some time.
Yeah, because if you look, you hear us refer to it as the Blue Book, which is just the blue book that is our contract is printed in. It's got a blue cover. There's generally copies at the watch desk at firehouses. We give them out to shop stewards, but also you can find a copy of the contract on the members section of our website. It's also Bulletin 1 on the land. And if you bring that document up, you'll see it's comprised of multiple articles, and it's a long document. So we're at the table discussing these articles specifically, and we go article by article, trying to negotiate it. Obviously the one that everybody pays attention to is Article 42, like our wages, and there's also some Article 43, I believe it is, which has our specialty pay classes. That's where you'll find your technician pay, your paramedic pay, things like that. So I say that to say that the contract's also generally divided up into two categories. One is compensation, which are things that have a monetary element attached to it, like raises and premium pays. And then there's non-compensation, which are other articles that are meant to protect our working conditions and protect our existing rights and benefits. Whether it's language over negotiating about the safety committee and PPE, or language about watch detail. There's a whole myriad of articles in there, and I'd encourage every member, to give our contract a read, because that's really the foundation of what protects our rights on the job.
Yeah, and so given the lengthy articles that, not all of them are negotiated each year. Some don't require any changes, some do. But I have a count here. We actually had 23 bargaining sessions over the course of a year. They kind of faded off in September, and we'll talk about what happened later in last year. But we met essentially every 2 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And then had back and forth. Sometimes there's a lot to talk about, sometimes there wasn't. But, overall, do you think that over that course of the year we had a productive interaction with the city? And then also, I know you might not want to answer some of those questions because we are bound by a bunch of confidentiality in this process. So, you talked about the productiveness, or you could also talk about why we can't say some of that stuff at this moment.
Yeah. So I think if you look at the unfair labor practice complaint you filed, that we filed, that shows kind of what our satisfaction level was with the pace of negotiations, and we were glad that we prevailed in that complaint, and the department was found to be bargaining in bad faith because we were coming to the table every day ready to make a deal, and I don't think you can necessarily say the same for the other side, and that's what that ULP finding talks about. But as part of district law and the negotiation process, the two parties have to agree on ground rules that are and there's a lot of confidentiality associated with that, and we sign confidentiality agreements so that we're not allowed to discuss what goes on at the table. And I know that frustrates people. Everybody wants to know, what are we asking for, things like that. But unfortunately, we're bound by this confidential nature of this. And then that being said, you can see it on the back end, right? We'll see a lot of what was discussed in the arbitration, because that'll be a public document when it finally comes out and is issued. So that's where members will be able to get some more light shed on the process and might have some of their questions answered. But unfortunately, it's we're bound by confidentiality, and part of that, like, there's also a pro to that, right? Because a lot of things are thrown back and forth across the table. Sometimes some pretty wild stuff, right? That's never going to happen. But I think it would instill a lot of frustration, and anxiety in our membership, right? If we were divulging these things that were moving targets. It's why we always want to put out accurate information to the membership, and we always do, because we don't deal in rumors, right? We deal in facts, and that's where we have to go.
It would be very hard to manage that, trying to update membership on ongoing negotiations when they change so rapidly, or like you said, we might end up at one spot and someone's somewhere we're in the middle. I think it'd be good to explain some of that stuff after the fact, when we're not bound by a lot of this confidentiality, just to inform the members. I think they'll also have access to the ULP ruling once it can be. I guess it's under seal right now until negotiations are over.
Yeah.
So you can read about that.
Yeah. There'll be a redacted version that will become available, that we'll obviously share when we're able to with the membership. But yeah, I mean, and just think of it outside of all that, right? Think about it in anything that's happening today, whether it's what's going on in the Middle East right now with Iran, or what's going on in the business world, right? There's a reason that negotiations are confidential. And so this situation with us negotiating our contract in one way you compare it to that is really no different. You can't, in order to make progress in negotiations, it can be counterproductive if sides are going out and putting out information.
Yeah. All right. So what is it about impasse that is important for the membership to know? Like, you could almost declare impasse at any point in time?
No, you're not allowed to declare impasse until you're at a certain point in negotiations, right? Because you have to at least be at the table having attempting to have a substantive back and forth for a while, right? And the city just kept making empty promises to us, telling us they were close. We're going to get there. We'll have the money after this, or we'll have the money after that, right? And then once it just became clear, right, that they were just full of hot air, we declared impasse, right? There were a lot of abnormal things that happened that were not usual, right? Whether it was this congressional budget CR or other attempts at Congress cutting DC's budget, right, which threw some curveballs in the process and required some patience for the city to figure that out, right? But the second it was clear that they were not prioritizing putting money in our members' pockets, we declared impasse.
And so impasse involves a couple things. Like what is that doing at that point? It's basically a milestone in negotiations if there hasn't been an agreement, right?
Yeah. So you can declare automatic impasse under the DC statute, and that triggers a procedure that binds people by outside timelines, right? And this is all administered and overseen by something called the Public Employee Relations Board, who is essentially the independent district government mediator of these labor disputes between public sector unions and the district government. So as a result of that, the first portion of impasse, and impasse law is different in every jurisdiction, but in DC, it triggers us to get in front of a mediator. And then you try to make a deal in front of a mediator who's just sort of supposed to be this impartial negotiator between the two sides. And then the mediator sits there and they try to get us to a deal. But if it's clear to them that no deal is to be had, which became clear that our mediator, they essentially release us from mediation. They verify that we're still at an impasse. And then it goes back to the Public Employee Relations Board, and you request a panel of arbitrators, which is some other communication you've heard from us. And then we selected the panel. We say who we like. The department says who they like, and then it goes to PERB, and PERB basically picks the top ranked person from either side. So we ended up with an arbitrator through that process. And then now we're bound by these timelines with the arbitration proceeding.
All right, and now we finally have some timelines rather than not knowing when anyone was going to finally act on some of this stuff.
Yeah. It once it became clear to us that the city, you also got to keep in mind some of the external factors that are at play here, right? The mayor announced that she was not going to run for re-election. The last deal that we got, the mayor was running for re-election, and she wanted to button everything up quickly, and she made a deal with a lot of the larger unions to get that done, right? So she doesn't have those external pressures of running for re-election, right? Like they'll communicate with us through private channels that they really want to get us a deal and get a deal for us, but they just aren't prioritizing paying their workers in the city budget, right? So what this arbitrator will do is give them no choice but to pay the money. And we don't really agree with how we've gone about that, right? And we're voicing our opinion about that in front of the city council, and just we need to get the city to a better place to negotiate in good faith every time. We shouldn't have to go to an arbitrator just for them to order them to pay us, right? Because their argument is essentially that if they have an arbitrator's ruling, then they can go into the budget and say, hey, we have to pay the firefighters this money, rather than identify money in the budget specifically designated for our raises, which in my mind is frustrating because that's just them not prioritizing.
Yeah, doing their job.
Yeah.
So it's kind of almost like they want someone else to do their tough decisions, make their tough decisions.
Yeah. I think, and that's what's frustrating from our angle, right? We're out here advocating for our members, right? And nobody else is stepping up to do the same. But this is why you're in the union, right? This is why you join the union. This is why you participate, right? Because it gives us the resources to be able to win this fight, right? And we are putting on a very, very, very strong case. We're going to come in there ready to fight and ready to keep fighting for people. And I've got a lot of confidence in our team. And at the end of the day, right, arbitrators see that, and they see who puts on the better case.
So what we'll try to do is continue to update members during this process. We might not be able to provide, like we talked about earlier, a lot of updates, but we'll make a point to make sure whatever we can release, we'll get it out to them.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it's in there, right? We are working as hard as we can, all guns blazing, right? But there's a strategy to all of this. So we're going to keep implementing that strategy to get a good, fair deal for our members, and we're not going to let off the gas pedal.
That being said, members watching this video, please, if you want to get more of them, go to the website, the iff36.org. Make sure you can log in. Make sure we have your cell phone number, your email, and your home address. We need to be able to get in touch with you. And I know it's hard to always keep updating all these different databases, but we need to know how to get in touch with you so we can give you this critical information.
Yep. And, you know, a reminder, we're coming into the summer months, so we will still have our board of directors meetings monthly. And you can come to, if you can't make a general membership meeting, just because you're not a shop steward, it doesn't mean you can't come to the board of directors. You can come to the board of directors meeting and get the same update. And we'll continue to update members at our board of directors and general membership meetings, right, which are on a every 2-week schedule. You know, in addition to putting out communication to people as we get more to share.
I think that's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us, President Hogan.
Thanks for having me, Treasurer Finelli.
See you guys next time.